"What are you doing, old man? Acting all fearless?" the junior sergeant threw out, staring down the veteran's star as if it were a stolen trinket. The shattering glass cut through the midday heat when two tall officers, slick with sweat in their black vests, yanked the frail hand from beneath the strap of a bag. Nearby, children danced around with ice cream at the bus stop. Women clutched their purses tighter, yet no one dispersed. The scene drew everyone's attention like flames, attracting moths. Someone lifted a phone. A red recording light flickered, reflecting in the sweat-streaked glasses of the escort guard. "He is an Afghan veteran," a young man in a Spartak t-shirt shouted. "For you, chicken." "The old man rotted in the sand," murmured a weathered man in a faded field jacket, his chest covered with patches, familiar to every local. Before he could straighten, his silver-stubbled face slammed against the scorching hood of a car parked near the river. "What do you want?" The reply was the crisp snap of plastic zip ties. The old man's thin, sun-darkened, scarred hands twisted behind his back. Despite the heat, he trembled not from weakness, but from rage, kept in check by a rigid, immovable posture. A motorcycle messenger's badge, worn and faded, slipped onto the pavement. "Stop! He has medals!" A woman in a lilac scarf stepped forward, then immediately halted. The second officer rested his hand on his holster. The elderly man uttered no sound, only a short breath mixed with dust. "Quiet, daughter. We did not survive the storm for nothing." A sharp wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. The words were so soft that they barely reached anyone's ears. Listening closely, the meaning struck louder. Sirens blaring. The police cruiser's Capri jingled with the anxious tapping of heels on the pavement. "Enough stories," the senior officer snapped, jerking the veteran toward the patrol van's open door. "We will file a report for disobedience." As the metal door slammed shut, the bus stop seemed doused in boiling water. Some cursed, others wept, yet no one offered aid. The wind stirred the black and orange ribbon tied to the old backpack the veteran had left on the bench. The stripe swayed like a distress flag, while inside the van cramped air, dust, and heavy anticipation weighed on them. The old man lifted his head, peeling his cheek from the iron wall, and peered through the foggy window. Far beyond the rooftops of the 5-story buildings, a storm front rumbled. He closed his eyes and slowly, as if testing every bone's integrity, squared his shoulders. The sergeant opposite perceived this as a threat and moved closer, but the veteran remained still. No blood stained the detainee's face. Only a thin red line marked where he had recently removed the oxygen mask he wore after a heart attack 3 years prior. It looked like a burnt chain, as if invisible shackles had followed him here. Almost inaudibly, keys jingled. The door would be locked from inside, and the van would head toward the far edge of the case. Before the metal flap fell, the old man quietly said, not to the guard nor the crowd, but seemingly to the empty sky, 4 minutes. Exactly 4. The words faded, but the ominous countdown had already begun. The door creaked again, this time made of iron. An elderly man without a surname was seated on a creaky chair beneath a peeling emblem. The on-duty local officer filled in the line with a dash, leaving the detainee silent, barely swaying as if absorbing the surrounding commotion like an echo of distant gunfire. It was only when the young investigator, crumpling the report, asked for the date of birth that he muttered, "The 29th of June, 1940. Suddenly, the papers came to life. They entered Michael James Carter into the protocol. The investigator lifted his eyes. This name sounded familiar. The small town lived through foreign words like Afghanistan, Grozny, Botlik, but rarely grasped their true meaning. Michael James Carter carried that weight himself. Beneath his faded jacket fabrics, where long, unpolished metals gleamed, hid scars, dented plates, and a shrapnel lodged in his knee. At home, in a tiny two-room apartment near Victory Park, only a quiet ticking alarm clock and neatly tied dahlias on the balcony awaited him. Carter was a widower. His wife Linda passed away 8 years ago, not living to see their copper anniversary. Their son died near Hankala, caught in an explosive trap. Since then, the veteran lived with his grandson Ethan, a 17-year-old schoolboy who trained running with his grandfather's backpack, dreaming to one day enter Ryazan. In the mornings, Michael James Carter repaired neighbors' irons and electric cookers. His hands knew a soldering iron as well as a rifle. Evenings found him wandering the market, selecting flexible stalks for dahlia cuttings. If his leg ached, he'd sit on a bench where young people listened to music from their phones. Once a month he sent letters, genuine paper ones, to his comrades in arms. To Alex Scott, Paul Leonard, Amin Malik, and the Dagestani Saeed Ahmed. The letters were dispatched to Kaluga, Grozny, and Makhachkala, and they always began the same way. Alive. Well, the leg sings in the rain. Rumors circulated that last spring, Michael James Carter took part in drafting a confidential report about the misuse of authority by some district police departments. He traveled to Moscow for a closed meeting, but returned silently, simply tucking a slim red folder into his desk. Today he went to the market early to buy wire for tying plants. At the stop beneath the bank windows called Slavyansky, 3 young men pushed him, laughing at rusty iron scraps. He responded only with a look, and soon the police arrived. Someone had complained that a strange old man was threatening with a knife. The knife turned out to be a folding pruning shear. That is how he ended up here, under the whistle of the fan and the hollow echo of footsteps down the corridor. The investigator, after filling in the last line, snorted. Retired lieutenant colonel, impressive, but does not excuse administrative offenses. Are you talking about the uniform or your fate now? The veteran quietly asked, and she, unused to such tone, glanced away. The second hand clicked 12 times. Michael James Carter figured to himself 2 minutes had passed since they seated him. Less than half of the promise of 4 minutes remained. From the adjacent office came a burst of shouting. The operative argued with an unseen interlocutor. "Will your boss call back?" The phrase cawed like a crow on electric wires. Carter paid no mind. His eyes drifted across the wall, where photographs of local police officers participating in skiing competitions were displayed. Suddenly, the bolt clicked, and a sturdy man entered the room, wearing 2 silver stars on his shoulder straps. "What are you doing here, old man?" He settled down, tapping a pencil on the table. "Trying to play judge and jury by yourself?" The veteran replied calmly. "I sat down to wait for the bus." "Yeah, and you pulled a knife. A pruning knife. What difference does it make? Do you want us to throw you into a mental institution?" Michael James Carter remained silent. The captain waved his hand in irritation. "Bring the guy who recorded this, and have him delete the footage," he shouted down the corridor. The veteran quietly adjusted the cap that had been returned to him, along with his personal belongings. His fingers brushed over a slim metal badge engraved back in 1979 inside the inner pocket. 3 minutes. He recalled the Kandahar night when he counted seconds until reinforcements arrived. Back then, they also promised 4 minutes, and they showed up nearby. "The longer you keep me here," he said, "the shorter your next workday will be." The captain seemed to lose interest as if hearing a salty joke. "Trying to intimidate me? You are raising your grandson under a bond. I am only stating the truth." The veteran closed his eyes. The noise from the corridor faded, and footsteps slowed. He knew the countdown was reaching its end. Michael James Carter was waiting for them to start tearing things apart, not his papers. He understood the system protects itself with a fortress of documents. First 40 pages of reports, then emptiness. A gust of wind slammed the open window, and a copy of a statement, supposedly written by a passerby, fluttered onto the table. It contained threats. He wielded a knife and swung wildly at the children. The handwriting was girlish, the letters soft, written by the very same person. The investigator spoke, but only repeated what others had said. "Sign here." The captain jabbed his finger at an empty space on the page and added, "Then you will go home." Michael James Carter slowly lifted his head. Silence clung like a rusty nail, twisting deeper into the captain's mind. The story continued. Right where you are watching us from, and subscribe to the channel. "What is pride but an obstacle?" he smirked. "Today you are nobody, while we hold the power." From the hallway came the thin voice of a woman. "Let me go. I only want to return my phone." A short male shout echoed back. Then the door slammed shut. Michael recalled Afghanistan. No dust, no clamor, just the calm before the storm when even dogs fell silent. Now the air smelled just like burnt metal and sudden dread. "I will not sign," the veteran declared firmly. "Fine." The captain leaned on the table with his elbows and said, "Then Article 23 applies. Insubordination carries a fine or 15 days in custody. Does that make you feel more comfortable?" The veteran rose. His leg betrayed him, and he leaned heavily on the chair's back. "Sit down," the captain barked, but his voice faltered. The veteran's eyes held a stillness, as if forged from unbreakable steel. Handcuffs were pulled from the cabinet, and the investigator recoiled, asking, "Why?" "He is just a precaution." The captain slammed the metal rings together like a blacksmith striking an anvil. The ratchet clicked, echoing down the hall like the bell signaling the start of a fight. At that moment, the reception door burst open. The duty lieutenant ran in, his face turning pale as he held a piece of paper. "Comrade Captain, we have a situation." "What is it?" the officer snapped. Outside in the yard, some commotion was unfolding. Military personnel. Probably contract soldiers brought someone. "Tell them to wait." There are tigers without license plates and bulletproof vests with no insignias. They lined everyone up at the checkpoint. The captain froze as if he suddenly saw a foreign uniform on his own shoulders. Michael James Carter sat back down, chuckling softly. 3 minutes and 15 seconds. "Who allowed you to start counting?" the captain snapped. "I have questions here." But the door jerked again, and a man entered the office. About 2 meters tall, without a cap. On his chest was a dark patch of the Kadyrov Special Battalion, but without a name. Then an officer followed, holding a red folder. "Who are you?" The captain stood up. "Federal Special Unit, Ministry of Defense." The bass voice rumbled without any hint of emotion. "Where is Lieutenant Colonel Carter?" The captain instinctively pointed to a chair. The visitor nodded, his eyes fixed on the veteran with a warm, almost familial squint. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, your only injury is pride," Carter replied. "We will remove those now." The visitor took a handcuff key from his breast pocket. "This is a detainee." The captain tried to object. "We only have administrative jurisdiction here." "You have a headache," corrected the prosecutor, placing the red folder on the table. "And also an unscheduled inspection based on 4 complaints accusing abuse of power, signed by the Deputy Minister of Defense." The captain's face twisted, as if gravel had been poured into his mouth. The investigator crossed herself as she looked at the cabinet, walls, and ceiling. "This is civilian territory," the captain muttered. "Territory of Russia's National Guard," the visitor clarified. "The federal level outranks the district." The key clicked, freeing the veteran's hands. Metal rings struck the table, and silence fell like a slammed door between worlds. "Before and after. Are you without court rulings?" the captain began. "Is there a decision?" The prosecutor opened a folder. On top lay photocopies of torture reports, seized medical records, mother's statements about missing detainees, your signatures. Sweat rolled down the captain's temple. For a moment, he saw himself through unfamiliar eyes, small and confused. "Carter will appear as a witness," the prosecutor stated. "You obstructed. This is the new team." The investigator hid behind the computer screen. Someone in the corridor gasped from the stench. Suddenly, a radio blared. "Second post! Urgent! People are gathering under the gates!" The captain rushed to the window. In the square before the police station, crowds with division flags and photos of veterans on their chests gathered. Gray-haired men in camouflage and young lads with green berets blocked the road. Someone held a banner. "Honor cannot be taken away." The veteran stood up. His leg cracked, but no grimace followed. "My grandson is taking a test now," he said, looking into the captain's eyes. "Will I make it back by lunch? Join us." The visitor nodded toward the door. 5 minutes, and you would be gone. Carter adjusted his beret, glanced at the clock face. 4 minutes and 47 seconds. The promise fulfilled well in advance. "Comrades!" The prosecutor turned to the captain and chewed every word like a piece of metal shrapnel. "Removed. Weapons and badge on the table." Immediately, the sound of pistols placed on the glass echoed like funeral bells. "I am not," the captain began. He glanced around as if searching for an escape route. "It's too late," the veteran said curtly. "There. My men are already there." Indeed, 2 more Tigers appeared outside the window. The wind swayed the St. George ribbon on the backpack, carried carefully with both hands by one of the soldiers, as if it were a banner. A wave of heavy silence rose from the hallway to the office. In this stillness, fates were hanging in balance. Words lost their power. Only actions remained. Michael James Carter looked at the handcuffs and saw not a chain but an open circle, an emptiness where humiliation had once been. Now there was freedom brought by brotherhood. The Special Forces soldier with the Chechen patch turned to the investigator. "Take the woman to the corridor. Explain the procedural rules to her." She rose obediently, but lingered at the door. "Excuse me," she said, turning to the veteran. "I really did not mean any harm." He raised his hand, interrupting her. "Actions matter more than apologies. Show it in your report tomorrow." Something resembling bitterness flickered in her eyes before she left, closing the door behind her. Meanwhile, the prosecutor carefully arranged new documents on the desk: an order to suspend officials, a directive for an internal probe, and a command to forward the cases to the military tribunal to examine possible links between the district police department and private security groups suspected of extortion. "Do you really believe," the captain asked with a trembling voice, "that you have enough authority?" "And do you have enough integrity?" the prosecutor replied. "Your institution insulted the honor of an officer who defended this country long before you came along. How did you learn to fasten a belt properly?" Michael James Carter felt a heaviness in his chest, not from words, but from the way the neighboring world seemed to split apart. He had been taught to save a comrade at any cost, but how could one save those who put on the uniform to strike at the weak? He took a deep breath. His leg ached. Memories surfaced. Whistles of mortars and the sharp crack of grenades. With great effort, he shut off the past. Here and now demanded something else: to stand tall when others fall. "No, we came armed," the veteran whispered quietly. "The weapon came with you when you decided that rank meant immunity." No one argued. Behind a thin wall came footsteps, the snapping of folders, muffled voices. Something was breaking within these walls, not the concrete, but the habit of impunity. A distant siren announced the arrival of regional officials, the police chief, investigators of the Special Commission. This was common in Chechnya when the leader visited the position. At first, the rotors of helicopters buzzed, then the air smelled of kerosene and fear. "It is time," the prosecutor said. "We are taking him away." 2 soldiers helped the veteran walk, not like a detainee, but like an honored guest, assisted out of the stifling room. Passing by the captain, Carter paused. Their eyes met. There was resentment and confusion in one, quiet exhaustion in the other. "I will take revenge," said the veteran. He nodded, then stepped into the corridor, where the air smelled of fresh plaster, as if the building was about to be rebuilt, and the first layer of old paint, along with lies, had been stripped away. Into the courtyard, freedom awaited. Through the department gates, made of steel panels covered in layers of peeling green paint, wide openings gaped like broken teeth, allowing passage for 3 armored tigers that on any ordinary day would only be found in news reports about the Caucasus. Engines idled, exhaling hot diesel fumes. Sleeping gunmen rested on the armored vehicles, their faces hidden behind masks, while their eyes appeared as steel rivets in dark slits. People in the courtyard parted, but did not flee. Those in camouflage stood shoulder to shoulder, some leaning on canes, others bearing scars on their foreheads. This was the front line of Michael James Carter's comrades, those who had shared the damp soil of trenches, nighttime marches, and endless mountain raids. They never called themselves veterans, because war stays alive in the soul as long as even one remembers it. They simply called each other brothers. 4 minutes, said a tall man with a thin tactical jacket, glancing at his watch. We're a bit late, getting old. His name was Amin Malik. Under the call sign Fang, he had served in the second campaign from Gudermes to Etam Kale. Standing nearby was Alex Scott Leonard, a former sapper and now chairman of the Combatants Council in the Central District. The trio was completed by Saeed Ahmed, a short Dagestani with eyes the color of a stormy sea, once a scout and now an instructor for a youth military patriotic club. But where is Michael James Carter? Amin asked one of the soldiers who greeted them on the steps. The man silently nodded toward the interior of the building. Let's get to the point, Alex Scott said, stepping forward. No theater involved. They entered the corridor. The air inside was thick with dust and sweat. The officers, spotting an unfamiliar uniform, backed away, pressing themselves against the walls as if the walls could swallow them whole. One young lieutenant, barely 20 years old, raised his rifle. Step back. No entry, kid, Saeed Ahmed said quietly without slowing his pace. Have you ever jumped from a parachute at 800 meters? What? Then put your weapon down before your knees give out from fear. The lieutenant lowered his rifle. Malik's men moved like a single shadow. They didn't run or shout, but the space seemed tighter as they passed by. They entered the captain's office without knocking. The prosecutor, already standing by the window, nodded in greeting. Only 60 seconds late, he remarked, but the impression remained powerful. Amin smiled slightly. Who was counting? The lieutenant colonel prosecutor winked. He had discipline. Michael James Carter sat on a chair, his hands free, though the handcuffs lay on the table like lifeless bugs missing their legs. He stood up as he saw his friends, and for the first time that day, a faint but genuine smile began to form on his lips. Why did you cause a ruckus? Scott asked, patting his comrade on the shoulder. Thought we had nothing to do after retirement? Couldn't resist the pleasure of gathering you again? The veteran replied, even if just for a few minutes. The captain, still frozen by the wall, tried to find his voice. You can't just interfere like this, can you? We can, Saeed said softly. And we will. We have the mandate from the Chief Military Prosecutor's Office. Representation of a witness's interests in a case involving abuse of authority is gaining momentum. Share where you are watching us from and subscribe. Which case do you mean? The captain felt as if the ground beneath his feet had turned into sand. We do not have it. We do. The prosecutor again pointed to the red folder. 4 volumes, reports, audio recordings, medical findings. Since last summer, You have been systematically beating detainees. 150 complaints were ignored. Now the brakes have failed." Voices echoed down the corridor. The inspection team from the Regional Investigation Committee tried to enter, but faced a tight circle of veterans. Amin Malik stepped to the door, opened it, and motioned with his hand. "Let them in." The circle broke, allowing civilians in gray suits through. First entered the colonel of the Regional Investigation Committee, then the deputy prosecutor of the area. They greeted the veterans as equals, not formally, but with the memory of shared trenches from any war, where people are divided into those who shoot and those who pray, regardless of rank. "Who is the shift leader?" asked the colonel, scanning the room. The captain stepped forward, blushing. "Weapons and ID on the table," the colonel commanded without hesitation. The metal touched the glass for the second time that day. The captain lowered his eyes, as if it were not a weapon, but his own honor lying there. Near the window, Amin noticed a nail torn out of the frame and raised an eyebrow. "This is shameful for such a place," said the captain. "Do you have a budget for repairs?" "Where is it?" The captain remained silent. "All right," said Malik. He sighed deeply. "Rights are not given. Rights are claimed." He turned to the prosecutor. "We must get Michael out." His leg was weak, and the air here was stale. The prosecutor nodded silently. One of the soldiers called for medics. Inside their black tactical bags, there was crushed ice and painkillers. But Michael James Carter refused to be carried. He insisted on walking by himself, only holding his friends by the elbow when the stairs sent sharp pain to his knees as they descended. Faces peered out from every office. Curiosity blended with confusion. Along the corridor, portraits of commanders were being taken off the walls. Someone shouted from below, "Take off their ranks before it is too late." Outside, people parted to create a living corridor. Some wanted to applaud, but Alex Scott waved his hand. The silence was louder than any ovation. Halfway through, the veteran sat down on a concrete curb to catch his breath. His leg throbbed, and his lungs wheezed from the stale air. Amin Malik came down beside him, placing his hand on his comrade's shoulder. "Remember 95?" he asked quietly. "When we evacuated children from New Calais?" There was smoke. Michael nodded solemnly. A silent prayer hovered between them. Amin smiled with his eyes alone. Sweat glistened on their eyelashes. Today was also a prayer, but this time for justice. Behind the iron fence, people gathered quietly. The press arrived, yet those in camouflage politely requested they put away their cameras. This day was not meant for television. A thick silence descended like sapper smoke after an explosion. People understood that right now, the Sentinel booth was collapsing before the eyes of the city. Pseudo-forces appeared. In the empty doorway stood something ancient and forgotten respect. Michael James Carter stood up. His body resisted, yet his spirit was alert. He spotted his grandson, Ethan, in the crowd. The boy gripped his backpack tightly as if passing a relay. The young man's eyes sparkled not with tears, but with pride. "Grandfather," Ethan whispered, "we will wait at home." "Do you remember how many minutes we had near Shilinsky?" the veteran asked. 7. And today, 4 minutes were enough. Michael smiled. The world is learning after all. The first thunderclap of a storm broke in the sky. Dust pressed to the ground, carrying the scent of ozone and freedom. People did not know what tomorrow would bring, but sensed that today they had done something that neither rain nor time could erase. The nighttime rain cloaked the city in a silver web, washing away the smell of gunpowder, but not their anxiety. In the office of the acting head of the local police department, the windows stood wide open. The heavy air lingered, as if absorbing stains of shame. A thermos of tea without a saucer rested on the desk alongside a sheet of paper, a copy of an order from the Ministry of Defense. The headline spoke about the implementation of an alpha control regime and the review of personnel files. Michael James Carter sat on an old sofa covered with a military poncho. His experience on the front had taught him the value of dry warmth. Nearby, the prosecutor flipped through documents, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said at last, "according to the reports you provided the analysts with data that exposed cases of systematic abuse." The veteran took a sip of tea. "I handed over the lists of appeals from mothers and wives. My friends had gathered the information. We cannot remain silent when people are broken over a cigarette or for asking an extra question. Why was the name hidden? Because the name overshadows the content, and the content is what truly matters." The prosecutor nodded. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a new audit report revealing suspicious activities. The purchase of a dozen computers at the cost of a trawler, repairs to a shooting range that no one had ever seen. There were too many holes, too much blood for these details to go unnoticed. The door opened quietly. Amin, Alex Scott, and Saeed entered. They removed their wet berets, unfastened their load-bearing vests, and sat in a semicircle facing each other. "People in the city are gathering candles," Saeed reported. "They are already spreading raincoats over the unknown soldier's monument, so the photos won't get wet." "We asked for no theatrics," the veteran sighed. "This is not theatrics," Alex replied. "This is memory, not about us, but about how humiliating a veteran humiliates a nation." The prosecutor placed another document in Alex's lap. It was a petition from the Federation Council of Veterans, requesting the honorary citizenship of the region for Michael James Carter. "Unnecessary," the veteran waved off. "Necessary," Saeed said, "so that future generations have something to compare their own behavior against." The door creaked open again, letting in a tall man in a civilian trench coat pressed against his wet suit. He introduced himself as the Deputy Defense Minister. His handshake was firmer than expected from an official. "I bring gratitude from the minister," he said, while sitting across from the veteran. "However, we realize that gratitude is just words. We are prepared to take action." He spread out a map of the region and marked 3 areas with red crosses. Similar complaints had emerged there. "Are you willing to accompany the team as an advisor?" Michael James Carter took a deep breath. His leg ached. His heart demanded rest. But then he recalled the boy with the camera, the woman in the lilac scarf, the girl who carried flowers to the monument yesterday. "Yes," he said, "but under certain conditions." The minister raised an eyebrow. "The first, every detainee must receive a lawyer before the first night. Second, the surveillance cameras must not be turned off for any reason. Third, the reports have to be published openly without any redactions." The room fell silent as if the streetlights had been extinguished. The minister nodded slowly. "It will be done." "Fourth," the veteran added, "silence. No marching, no fanfares, no celebrations. This is not a parade, but a process of correcting mistakes." Amin Malik snapped his fingers with a smile. "We already came up with a hashtag." He stopped abruptly, noticing his friend's somber gaze, and sighed. "Just kidding. No banners." Everyone laughed softly, almost soundlessly. A brief, nervous relief that disappeared like a drop of alcohol. The minister wrote down the conditions, then took a thin envelope from his briefcase. "Here is the order for financial compensation. We know about your pension." The veteran raised his hand. "I was not standing at the bus stop for a pension. Leave the compensation to the families of those detained, who had their bones broken." Silence covered the room like a blanket. For a moment, no one breathed. Later, the prosecutor returned the envelope to the official. "We will find a way," he said. The clock struck midnight. The bulb on the ceiling flickered, as if struggling to bear the weight of the conversation. "It is time for us to go," Saeed said, rising to his feet. Dawn was only 5 hours away. The veteran stood up with difficulty. His cloak tent slipped from his shoulders. Amin helped him put on a dry jacket and handed him a cane. "How is your leg?" he whispered. "Sounds like sand squeaking," Michael replied with a smile. An old, familiar sound. They stepped into the corridor. There stood the investigator. Her hands trembled and her eyes were red. "Lieutenant Colonel," she began. "Publish the truth," Carter interrupted her. "Otherwise, you will waste your precious youth in vain." She nodded, clutching the folder to her chest. Her footsteps faded away into the darkness of the hallway. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the moon emerged from behind the clouds. The air smelled of wet asphalt and flowers. The very dahlias Ethan had tied on the balcony the day before. "Have you seen Marchenko's son?" Alex asked suddenly, adjusting his shoulder strap. "Yes," Michael answered. "He became a doctor. So our efforts were not in vain." The evening of the year 1968 surfaced in his memory. Young faces, the promise to survive and reunite at home. Half of those promises were lost in the ravines, but the other half sat now in the department's black courtyard. It smelled of fuel oil and memories, and still knew how to keep a promise. The minister came out next, talking on the phone. The signal cut through the silence, but nobody was annoyed. In this restless ring, hope for change was now interwoven. Left alone with the tiger, the veterans took off their wet jackets hung as their eyes fixed on the darkened windows of the Paradise Works. Inside, the light was gas. Room after room, floor upon floor, the office extended. "You know," said Saeed, "sometimes you just need to switch off the light to see who remains in the room." "And sometimes," Michael James Carter replied, "it is to understand who will turn the lamp back on." Alex looked toward the square, where crowds once gathered by day, now tea candles were placed, arranged in a way that from above spelled a single word: honor. "And yet people endlessly crave light," he declared. Suddenly, tires rustled. Around the corner came a regional television van. The cameraman raised his equipment, but Amin approached and covered the lens with his hand. "Not today, brother. Not today." The journalist nodded in understanding. He was a recruit from the same unit, having simply chosen a different tool of war, the microphone. "Then at least say," he muttered, "that everything will be different." "It will be, but not by itself. We will have to make it happen," Michael said. "And you too." Only 3 hours remained until dawn. The veterans jumped into the armored vehicle. The door slammed shut. The engine growled softly and respectfully, as if aware of the burden it carried. They drove toward the hospital to visit one of the beaten detainees in a coma for the 3rd week. Thus ended the night, and a new watch began. The emergency room was quiet, machines beeping softly. A nurse looked up and froze at the sight of people in camouflage. Michael approached the young man's bed and reviewed the chart. Traumatic brain injury, broken ribs, familiar wartime statistics, but of a different moral battle. "Will he wake up?" Saeed asked. 50-50 chance, the nurse replied. The veteran sank into the chair. His hand rested on the cold wrist of the young man. "Hold on, son. We've sorted it out. Now you are not alone." The chill of slow fingers was met with warmth. Michael James Carter gave a faint smile, barely visible. "We will heal every bone," he said. "I swear." In the hospital corridor, the sound of footsteps echoed dully as a reporter followed closely despite being refused entry. He filmed the sign above the entrance. Trauma department, a deserted hallway, unaware that the real story unfolded inside the ward, where an old soldier held the hand of the wounded boy and translated pain into words of hope. When they stepped outside, the sky began to lighten. The east blazed with orange, like a St. George's ribbon melting in the morning clouds. "Time to go home," said Amin Malik. "Time," agreed Michael. "But first, take me to the market. I need wire. Geraniums require support. Not tired yet?" Alex Scott grinned. "Once a flower has sprouted, it cannot be broken." They drove away, leaving behind the hospital, the district, and the silent night. Ahead lay a day filled with endless paperwork, protocols, and interrogations. Yet in this dawn, the longtime backbone of fear cracked, letting light seep through, and even if the gap closed quickly, Michael knew their silent brotherhood would gather again as soon as the chain of humiliation rattled against a stranger's hood. He lowered his head and dozed off to the drone of the engine, Amin watching the road, wiping rain like tears from his face. Tears he did not shame. The day would be hard, but honest. A pink sunrise touched the roof of a ramshackle house on the outskirts. In the window that once held a peeling frame with the words, "Glory to the airborne forces," a breeze now flowed freely, carrying the crisp scent of damp earth. Michael James Carter stepped into the yard. Leaning on his cane, he held a wooden box filled with seedlings in his free hand. The young dahlia shoots were tiny, yet full of spirit. He set the box near the garden bed, knelt down, and touched the cool, rain-soaked soil with his fingers. Somewhere far away, the city hummed with buses, vendors, and the ringing of a school bell. Yet here, between the apple tree and the neglected shed, there was silence more powerful than any melody. Holding the shovel was difficult, but he dug stubbornly. Each clump of soil, rich with earthiness, reminded him of different excavations. Those where mines were found beneath bayonets. Those where stone was cut. Those where dugouts were dug. The ground held the memory of fingers, and the fingers held the memory of pain. He transplanted the seedlings one by one, gently covering them with loose clods of earth. This work absorbed the extra noise, the honking cars, the rustle of news, the whisper of bureaucratic excuses. Only the straightforward movement remained here. Over the fence, a youthful figure appeared. Ethan, returning from school. He darted into the yard and tossed his backpack onto the bench. "Grandpa, they are praising you on the radio," he shouted. "Let the wind praise me on the radio," the veteran smiled, leaning on the shovel handle. "We know ourselves who and what is worth." The boy bit his lip and sat down nearby, helping to press down the soil. "I did something good today," he quietly shared, standing up when the teacher said that veterans are history. I responded that they are the present, and that I thought about putting it that way. He gave a failing grade, and she said, "You are right." The veteran smiled. The dark circles beneath his eyes softened into gentle beams. From behind the fence, a neighbor appeared, an elderly woman, Linda. In her hands, she held a paper cup filled with warm milk. "Michael James Carter, is this for you? Drink it while it is still warm," she said kindly. "We are proud of you." He nodded and gratefully accepted the cup. A UAZ vehicle stopped by the road. Amin and Alex stepped out of the cabin. They did not come inside. From behind the fence, they waved their hands. "We are checking on your flowers. They will survive," Michael shouted, "as long as we live honestly." His friends smiled and drove away. They were headed to the military enlistment office to give a talk to recruits about personal responsibility. Ethan tended to the last bush and asked, "Grandpa, what happens next?" "Spring. Flowers. Exams. And what about those police officers?" "The law," Michael answered. "The law must work, not fear." The grandson nodded. Around his neck shone his grandfather's army dog tag, a souvenir and a promise. The wind stirred an old St. George ribbon on the gate. Its color had faded, but the strength of its stripes remained undimmed. "So, the service continues?" the boy asked. "Service means never stepping back," replied the veteran, even if the front is now in paperwork and offices. He placed the shovel against the fence, stood upright, and surveyed the neat row of chutes. Each one had its place, support, and warmth. Moist earth rested in his palms. He stretched his hands toward the sky as if lifting a bloodless banner, and quietly said, "Every power grows from roots. May the roots not rot." Behind him, the gate creaked open. The boy stepped outside. The first person stepped outside like a scout. The veteran followed closely behind, leaving behind a neat line of the future, where what people had tried to crush yesterday would eventually bloom. He understood that ahead there would be reports, investigations, long nights of questioning. But there would also be dahlias, morning mists over the river, and the funny shouts of schoolchildren at the stadium. Each morning, he would step into the yard to check if any fragile leg needed support, a support he could still provide now. This was how his service continued, where conscience replaced orders, care took the place of weapons, and silence became the metal in which the sound of flowers growing could be heard. 2 weeks later, the hall of the City Officers Club resembled a military hangar. Cold lighting, rows of chairs, and the smell of titanium from old spotlights filled the room. On the wide podium, a long table was set for public hearings, following the review of the local police department. There were no posters or fanfares, only microphones and stacks of documents. In the front row sat veterans, some wearing formal suits, others parade uniforms, and some in worn cloth jackets without epaulets. Carrying all that in the heart, epaulets became unnecessary. Nearby were mothers of detainees, lawyers, journalists. Michael James Carter arrived late, his leg giving him trouble. Ethan escorted him in and helped him sit down. Opposite, across the aisle, the former captain kept his head lowered. He wore a civilian sweater, too new for a seasoned man. Probably bought that very morning to cover a neck without shoulder insignia. The hearings began with a report from the Deputy Minister of Defense. He listed the violations, figures, and dates. The words sounded dry, as if he were reciting a bomb disposal manual. Yet each word sank like a heavy metal weight onto someone's conscience. 26 facts of violations, 11 instances of evidence disappearance. 2 deaths occurred in the cell. People sighed, some whispered a prayer. Then the witnesses were given the floor. A young man with a bandaged head sat down and shared how he was beaten, forced to admit to a theft he did not commit. A woman from a rural shop explained how she was compelled to sign a withdrawal of her complaint. Their voices trembled, not from fear, but from the relief that comes when silence finally shatters. The captain was called last. He stood up, leaned forward, his lips quivered. He began and stopped. "I will not make excuses." A ringing silence filled the room. It seemed even the lamps ceased humming. "I joined the police to protect," he said. "But one day, I decided that the uniform gave me the right to disregard voices and only order. I stopped seeing people." He lifted his eyes and met Michael James Carter's gaze. There was no triumph there, only fatigue. "Apologies will not restore what has been broken," the captain continued. "I am ready to accept punishment, but ask for a chance to make amends, to work in construction for the victims' families and organize legal consultations." The hall froze. The prosecutor wrote something down. The minister nodded and said, "The petition is accepted and will be decided by the court." After the formal part, people stood up but did not disperse. They gathered around Michael James Carter, forming an invisible circle. Some shook his hand, while others quietly nodded in agreement. A woman appeared wearing a purple scarf, the same one who had tried to intervene at the bus stop earlier. She brought a small box containing a garden pruning shear that had been recently repaired. The blades gleamed as if they were brand new. "I thought you could use this more," she said. The veteran smiled. and carefully slipped the pruning shear into his jacket pocket. Then a former captain approached. He spoke softly, but his words reached those standing nearby. "Why did you forgive me?" "No one spoke of forgiveness," Michael replied. He was talking about the right to make amends. The captain fell silent, lowering his eyes before firmly stating, "Then let me help restore the monument." This was about the memorial wall, where a bullet hole left by the fascists remained embedded near the names of the fallen. About a year ago, the stone slab cracked, and repairs had been postponed until funding was secured. "If you work with your hands," the veteran nodded, "the slab will hold." Everyday conversations followed. Some asked for lawyers' contacts. Others shared stories about inspections in other districts. Amin stepped onto the stage, not to speak, but to help his mother patrol the platform. The scene seemed plain, almost dull. Yet beneath this ordinary atmosphere, something significant was taking shape. A social agreement that the law surpasses appearances and respect is stronger than fear. As the hall emptied, Ethan sat beside his grandfather. "Are you tired? Like after a march?" "A bit," he answered. "But it was worthwhile. I signed up as a volunteer," the young man shared enthusiastically. "I will assist the lawyers by gathering documents. It was a good march. We all will." They stepped outside near the officer's house. Heavy clouds hung overhead. Yet in the west, a narrow strip of sunset glowed faintly. Amidst the scent of damp concrete, the warm aroma of roasted chestnuts pierced the air. Somewhere in the courtyard, children roasted nuts over a small fire. Near the main entrance, a captain stood holding a box of cement and a bucket filled with tools. "Let's go," he said, looking at the veteran. "Where? To the slab? It is still light outside. We will finish sealing the joints before the rain comes." The three of them set off. An old man with a cane, a young man carrying a backpack of documents, and a man without insignia holding the cement bucket. They moved slowly but steadily, each step on the pavement sounding like a new line in a solemn anthem. At the square by the monument, the smell of wet granite filled the air. Wooden planks of the scaffold creaked beneath the feet of the hurrying volunteers. Someone had brought floodlights so work could continue through the night. The former captain, wearing construction gloves, mixed the mortar. His movements were awkward since his hands were used to holding documents instead of a trowel. Yet veterans stood nearby, their eyes quietly encouraging patience. This is how a soldier learns to hold a rifle again after injury. "Don't rush," Amin advised. "Let the mortar gain its strength." Saeed showed how to remove air bubbles from the mixture, demonstrating carefully. Michael James Carter, leaning on his cane, rested against the railing. He observed former prosecutors and their victims working side by side, sharing concrete and the beams of the floodlights. Instant justice is rare in this world, but today, the grip of bad habits tightened just a little bit less when the mortar settled. The last stitched seam was complete, and the young man's family emerged from the hospital. He moved carefully on crutches. His face was still marked with a network of stitches, yet his smile was bright and clear. His mother tightly held his hand, while he, spotting the veterans nearby, raised his thumb in a silent greeting. Ethan stepped forward to assist him down. Two peers stood close by, like strong ties of a freshly laid path. At that moment, the streetlights all switched on simultaneously. The monument gleamed in warm yellow light, and the new plaque reflected the rays so purely it seemed as if the stone itself was weeping. On it appeared an inscription as delicate as a nerve: "Memory of dishonor." Dead armor. The former captain removed his gloves and handed them over to the veteran. "Take these. I ruined the first pair while still learning," said Michael James Carter, handing the gloves over and glancing at his grandson. "Look closely. A person transforms when their hands have work to do." Suddenly, The rain started just like it always did, abruptly and cold, the white drops falling. People did not scatter, but shielded their wet hair with their palms, laughing joyfully. Then a chorus rose. Neither march nor anthem. It was a soldier's campfire song, an old tune with simple words about the journey home. Some sang out of tune, others hurriedly. But everyone joined in, even those whose vocal cords were used to commands rather than melodies. In the harmony of their voices lay a kind of armor. Armor made by the living who chose not to stay silent. By midnight, the cement had set solidly. The lights went out, but every window held a flicker of light. People placed candles on sills, as if passing the watch to the neighbor. Michael James Carter walked home slowly, as if after a harsh trek, with Ethan beside him. Passers-by stepped aside, not because of hurry but out of respect, not by title, but with the rights of a pioneer of a new path. At the gate, the veteran turned around. In the distance, a wet stone shimmered. He touched his chest. Beneath his jacket rested a note that had been handed to him by a recovering young man. "Thank you for lifting the lid," it said. He did not open it. He already understood what it contained, a request to continue living and to remember. The house smelled of damp earth. The seedlings were moved to the corridor to protect them from the rain. "Tomorrow we will plant them," Ethan announced. "Tomorrow," Michael agreed. He switched off the light and listened to the silence. It was not oppressive, but breathing. Somewhere, an old chandelier crackled. In the basement, a surviving rat creaked. Yet all this seemed like music of full breath. Gazing into the darkness, the veteran realized fear is not a scream or a blow, it is emptiness. Today they poured cement into this void, poured tea, planted flowers, and sang a song. That would be enough to prevent the night from collapsing into an abyss. He sat on the edge of the bed, took off his boots, and his foot quietly sighed with gratitude. The veteran closed his eyes. Outside, the wind stirred the branches. In its breath, a whisper was heard. The service continues. He smiled for the first time in many years before falling asleep. Ahead lay a new day, equally difficult, but no longer solitary. A day later, the town grew weary of conversations. The downpour washed away the last newspaper headlines from kiosk windows. On the outskirts, in a small club by the bus depot, people gathered. Mechanics after their shifts, a librarian, a retiree, a teacher, medical students. They reached out too. At the round table stood 2 kerosene lamps and a thick notebook with a worn cover. "This is the observation book," explained Ethan, flipping through the clean pages. "Anyone can record an incident of humiliation or abuse they have witnessed and leave their contact information. We pass these on to lawyers." A mechanic named Krupenikov scratched his woolly neck. "Do you think it will help?" he asked. "It will help if not just dozens, but hundreds sign," replied the boy. "The law responds to numbers." The door opened, and Michael James Carter entered. Leaning on a new cane, a gift from the hardware store, where there was an unspoken debt to veterans. "Did you all sign up?" he asked with a smile. People nodded. The librarian placed another lamp on the table. "The light must be bright, so no one mistakes a letter," the veteran said. "Remember, a complaint is also a form of service. It protects without weapons." A medical student handed him a glass of compote. To have strength, he drank it, savoring the taste of dried fruits, the flavor of childhood, the taste of peace among battles. When the last signature was written in the notebook, the lamps went out. The kerosene was finished, but no one noticed right away. The windows were lit by the pale light of the early moon. Someone whispered quietly, "See, even the sky is signed." They laughed silently, only their eyes shining. Going outside, the veteran faced the fresh wind. In the distance, the rails rumbled. The evening train was heading south. He thought of those inside: conscripts, shift workers, mothers with children. Each carried their own burden of hopes and fears. "May their journey be gentler," he whispered. Ethan approached, clutching a notebook close to his chest. "Grandpa, this book feels so heavy." The veteran replied, "Weight is a sign of truth. What is real always carries weight. The light things are carried away by the wind." They walked home along the empty street where the yellow windows of rare houses flickered like distant warning lights. Behind each window, someone lived who might one day cross the street, record what they saw, and say, "Today, I chose not to stay silent." At the end of the block stood a brand new road sign declaring, "Main Road." Ethan smiled. "We go straight ahead, straight forward," Michael James Carter confirmed, stepping first onto the fresh pavement. Behind them remained the club, the book, and the street lamps that would someday light up again. When will new people find the courage not to stay silent?